Meeting of the Beaufort County Board of Education Finance Committee to order. It's now 5 o'clock. We're in conference room E, doing remote hybrid conference meeting. And the meeting will be live streamed by the county channel. Have we had any public comments?
No, but we need to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I know, I'm just asking.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, sir. No, sir.
Okay, all right. The committee members, Richard Geyer, Earl Campbell, Christina Gross, and Rachel Wisniewski are all in attendance. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for
which it
stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Like to have approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Campbell has made a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. We'll give Dr. Gross the second. Any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And I'll again ask, do we have any public comments?
No, sir.
We have no public comments. I'd like to know if we could have a motion to approve the January 13th, 2022 committee meeting minutes.
Chairman, I make a motion that we approve.
Mr. Campbell has made a motion to approve. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
I hear Dr. Wisniewski seconding. Is there any discussion?
No, sir.
Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
I'll
Aye.
abstain.
I think we heard everybody saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing none.
Tina abstained.
Tina abstains. All right. Thank you. Okay, we will start with the FY 2022 second quarter financial report. Ms. Crosby.
Yes, sir. Is everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. So this is the second quarter financial report for the quarter ended December 31st, 2021. So for the first 6 months of the school year. So in a later report, we're going to talk about up-to-date information, which will carry forward for yet another month. But this is through December. So then it could be a bit confusing, but this is for the first 6 months. So as far as general fund revenues, we typically is our largest fund in the school district. We typically report primarily on those funds. Revenues were recorded, local tax revenues were reported at $83 million, or about 50.8%. The prior year collections were at 23.8, and that was due to the tax bill delay in the prior year. So the revenues were collected much later in the year than the current year. So I'm pleased to see 50% of the tax revenues at this point in the year. So that is something that's more typical of a tax year. We drew down approximately $15 million of a tax anticipation note in during October, so in that second quarter, and it will be repaid in February. So we're working on the paperwork now to repay that, since our January tax revenues have come in as well. State revenues are reported at $43.5 million, or 40.2% of the year, prior year was 40.8%. So they're basically in line. Those are state revenues in the general fund only. They're basically in line with prior years. Our expenditures are up a little, reported at $119.9 million, and recall our budget is $274.3 million. So this is about 43.7%. and the prior year spending was a little less than that. So we are spending a little ahead of the game this year. Primarily the additional spending is in the support programs as opposed to the instructional areas, primarily in the maintenance, custodial, grounds, and service contract areas. So in the special revenue funds, we had spending primarily, the bulk of our spending in special revenue right now is in the ESSER and ARPA funds. And so during that quarter, we spent $8.6 million of our allocations. And so we'll have an update on our next board meeting of ESSER, so I won't go into any more further detail on that particular fund, but next Tuesday night, we'll have an update on the spending and the activities there. Capital projects are outstanding, are 79.4% complete of our 8% projects. So as of the end of the second quarter. And we're going to be bringing forward in a future board meeting, particularly in the discussion on March 25th work session, about unused 8% funds. We're going to be closing out the 2018 and 2019 projects, and we'll bring those forward for discussion at the work session for the use of those funds. And our referendum projects for the 2019 referendum are about 68% as of December 31st. So that's the bulk of the information provided to you in the executive summary. And I'm not going to go into all the details of that summary, but you have those available. And I'll be happy to take any questions or comments you may have at this time.
Are there any questions? Mr. Campbell, okay, Dr. Gloss?
No, thank you.
And Dr. Wisniewski, do you have any questions?
No, sir.
I have a number, page number 3. You tell me every year what this is, and I never remember. Internal Service Fund, we're at 78%. And what is the Internal Service Fund?
Yes, sir. Okay, so the Internal Service Fund was established probably 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, as a fund that allows us to set aside a balance to cover unpaid liabilities for workers' compensation claims that we are anticipating in the near term. So we budget $900,000. We typically spend about $1 million in that area. And so it looks like the activity is stepped up a bit in this year. I don't have the details of what particular claims are, but typically that would involve larger claims than normal, more severe injuries and that sort of thing. So
right, because we're at 78% expended with half the year to go. So
correct. And the fund is the revenues that come into that fund are actually charges to the general fund. So those funds are really that the impact is replicated over in the general fund as well. So it doesn't, and also insurance proceeds flow into that fund as well to cover any, but we are self-insured for workers' comp. So the insurance proceeds would be very minimal and related to a property or casualty insurance type claim. So, so it's because we are self-insured for workers' compensation.
okay. Next question is on page 12. Did you get to it? Page 12. Supervision of special program. We're at 60.5% expended, and I see salaries and benefits are way out of whack. So what's going on there?
Yes, sir. There are a couple of categories in the report here today. There was some movement of a couple of staff members. Previously, we did not have a director or a student services officer. And so there were some budget shifts around to compensate for that, and some additional, an additional transfer is needed to correct that change, or another look at the salary, the actual individuals that are coded in that particular category, but it has to do with the student services group. So it's on our radar, and I've already asked my staff to take a look at that and make sure we're getting that those corrections made.
Okay, and so with the new budget, you will make those corrections.
Absolutely, we're going to get them right before the next quarter end, and so definitely the new budget will reflect the changes. Yes, sir.
Okay, and page number 18. Projected fund balance is approximately $8 million, not quite $8 million more than what we had beginning fund balance last year, correct?
It's actually not a projected number. That's probably poor labeling on that row. The increase or excess you see here of $7.7 million is the actual revenues that exceed the expenditures at this point in the year.
Okay.
So we have an excess right now, and the $50,550,000 was the prior fund balance, but that does not reflect what the end of year will be. It's only the revenues we've collected or received so far, and the money we've spent out as of that particular date. So,
well, I'll be bringing that back up a little later on. Next item is on page 22. Transfers to charter school, 159%.
That is typically in the about 20,000 a month. So that does look unusually large. There are also transfers to or from ACE for the food service program. We manage the program, the finances run through us, and ACE pays for the net profit or loss. So I will definitely look into the details of that area, but typically it should reflect about $20,000 a month. I particularly, I'm not certain what that activity reflects, so I will come back to the committee with a response on that one.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, the capital budgets, you say the 18 and 19 are going to close out. They should be closed out. And, that looks fine. That's on page,
First page.
It's first page of capital projects. But the other ones, we should be getting pretty close on 2020 as well. Okay, I have no other questions. Are there any other questions by the committee members? Okay.
No, sir.
All right.
Ingrid's on, David's on, and William.
And we have no hands up?
Well,
Okay.
I'll ask the question.
Yes.
So when I've forgotten what page it is, but you keep going to those student activity funds. Tanya, can you just give an explanation? The student activity funds are collected at the school. They primarily reflect the computer, I don't know what you call it.
Technology usage fee.
Yeah, usage fees. Okay, because there's a huge variety of how much each school has. And I don't know what page that is.
Yeah.
It's 24.
24.
Okay, thank you. Can you just speak to that, please?
So the district office balance is, the funds for technology usage fee in particular are collected at their school level, and in the transfers column in bold there, the second to the last column to the right, those are the transfers, transferring those funds into the district office location, and then we expend those funds on repairs for the laptops. If they're not spent down, we completely will use them to buy replacement laptops. So that's the bulk of the revenues. Also in the district office, those revenues also include any facilities use fees. So those would have been drastically reduced this year due to COVID, but that could be, that is a portion of that district office balance as well. So was your question referring to the balances in the individual schools?
Yes.
Yeah, there just seems to be such
From fundraising.
Yes. So
yeah,
the
such a
revenue,
wide range of balances.
yes, the balances in the accounts of the high schools in particular would reflect athletics. High schools and middle schools both have athletic funds in them, gate fees, net of any expenses they paid out. They would also include any performing arts center revenue if someone churches use the performing arts centers or dance recitals or so on. They would also include any other facilities use rentals if someone was using the cafeteria or other parts of the building or the parking lot even, or any place on the grounds. So donations are also in some schools represent a very large portion of their revenues. And so that some of them have accumulated quite a significant balance over the years. And then other schools either spend, they basically spend them on items that we do not allow with taxpayer dollars. So incentives for students, for example, T-shirts for staff or students. We don't typically allow clothing items that in the general operating funds. So that's the sort of thing that we see typically in some of our game officials are paid out of the gate fee revenues, and ticket takers are compensated through these funds as well. So there's a wide array of expenses that come and go from these type. Teacher appreciation as well, dinners, like pizza for teachers or breakfast for teachers on Teacher Appreciation Day. So that's their way of, they can compensate and show appreciation without having those affect taxpayer dollars. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rachel.
Dr. Wisniewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I kind of just had a question that came up as we were talking about the student activities fund balance. I think something just to consider for the future, especially because of the disparities in the amount of funds that are in various different schools and particularly the high school level. I think it might be beneficial if we were able to look at this from a per pupil standpoint. Because, May River High has probably double the student population than some of the others. So while they have a very high amount, if we put it into perspective of per pupil amounts, it might give us a different idea of how much funds could be expended on each individual student, whether it be sports or otherwise. So just an idea or a concept to think about as a way to look at this perhaps differently in the future.
I think I actually have a schedule in which I've done that. And I think if there will be a pattern, and it's basically based on, I think it's going to be connected to wealth and poverty, to be quite honest. So that's something that we'll see in those more affluent areas.
Hands up. Okay. Seeing none, let's move to the next item, the budget update.
Okay, so this update is a hybrid of 2 years. So really, as we begin our budget preparations for the next year, we have to really take a deep dive into the current year, and we are actively monitoring tax revenue as a major component of our next year's budget. So the first slide here displays that we have collected, as of January 31st, 90.5% of the revenue budget, tax revenue budget. So the total budget is $274 million, but 2/3 of our budget is tax revenue, which equals $163 million. So we've collected 148 of that 163 million. So we're at 90.5%. And one of the best indicators for us is to look at multiple years of collections or revenues received in our accounts through January 31st. So in interest of being able to read the data, I've only presented 4 years here, but we have a chart that lists it for probably 15 or 20 years. And so we can see what patterns are going back into time. But every year has a different factor. This year, there is a unique factor, but as we compare it, last year we had a tax bill delay, as you remember, and the tax deadline was extended to March 31st. The prior year was relatively normal, but it was the first year of COVID. The prior year to that was actually a reassessment year. Somewhere right in there, we had Hurricane Matthew, I think the year before that. So we've had a pattern in the last 5 years of sort of volatility, I guess you would say. So it's difficult to assess where we are in comparison to other years when certain issues are occurring or extensions may be occurring in that tax year. We go to the next slide, and the current year, the issue we're experiencing is that the county has waived penalties for legal residence applicants. So those folks that were billed a 6% ratio, assessment ratio for their homes, whether it's in error or they just moved into the area, are allowed to not pay their tax bill until that application is been approved or denied. So if they have not already paid their tax bill, they may wait to pay their bill until the application has been processed. And then they'll be notified of the outcome within 30 days, and then they pay the balance. But all of that is without penalty. So there is no real incentive to, if they have a legal residence application in progress, which would change their assessment ratio from 6% to 4%, then there is no advantage of them paying the tax bill. I think we had a meeting a few weeks ago with the county treasurer, and Ms. Wall stated that the 90+% of the legal residence applications were approved annually. So the majority of these will be switched, in my opinion, from 6% to 4% ratio, which will then remove all obligation to pay school operating taxes. School operations taxes are 60% of the general fund budget and will eliminate any tax obligation tax revenue coming to the district. So we're really in a time of uncertainty. We're having to just wait until each month to receive the information. 93% is good, but we do have about $10 million left to collect we will record those revenues all the way through August 31st. So I have requested some information from the assessor's office to gain any kind of data that might help support some calculations that we might be able to project what those numbers will be, but it's really not a year where we have any basis to compare upon. So we'll just be watching it closely, and we'll bring forward an update each month to this committee so that you are aware of where we are. The next slide just gives a history. I show this each year of where we are. The only point I want to make here is that we are facing a reassessment in a couple of years. 2024 is about when we will have it. It is required to be done every 5 years. So I would think at least by that tax year. And so that's going to be an important year for our tax revenue projections and calculations, and for active communication with the county, which I have pretty regularly. So that ends the discussion of the current tax revenues. So we'll move on to the next year revenues. So again, this is the graph of the 60-40 split between local and state revenue. So local revenue, of course, is primarily tax revenue, but the state revenue sources come in a couple of major sources, major pots. One is the Education Finance Act, or EFA, and the other is Tier 3 property tax relief. So those are the largest. Of $100 million we receive in state revenue in this category. These are two of the bigger sources of funds. There are about 40 different sources of funds in varying categories. But we'll talk about those in just a minute in more detail. So back to the tax revenue. Got a little ahead of myself there. So the mill rate is very important when it comes to the local tax revenue. The current operating millage rate is 121.6 mils. In order to get a reflection of what the school district is allowed by state law to increase that millage if needed, each year we have a maximum amount, a cap that is in place as a result of the state law Act 388. So this Act 388 caps our operating millage at inflation plus growth. And both of those numbers come to us from state officials, the Department of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs, and they come at different times. So at this point in time, we've received the inflation rate, but not the growth rate. And inflation this year, the percentage that we've been given is 4.7%. Now, this is the highest inflation rate I've seen, index that I've seen in many years. Last year, as an example, it was 1.23%. We have not yet received the growth rate. We know that the census occurred this year. There could be some question of whether we do have increases or, based on the data. But my understanding is that our index or our millage rate cap cannot go down from the 4.7%. So if inflation or if growth for any reason is a negative amount, and I don't think it will be, then that number would be no lower than this 4.7. So we are expected to receive the growth information. It should be released in March from the Fiscal Affairs Office. And the superintendent and I receive a letter from that office as soon as it's available. And then we'll update this information, update our tables, and bring that. I will keep the board and this committee informed of that rate. So the next slide is actually the calculation and how it's applied to. And so in the interest of getting an idea of about where we're at, what I've done is taken the millage rate, which I understand that this is maybe a little confusing, but the budget year 22-23 will be tax year 22. And I'm using the prior year's millage, which is this year, in order to calculate the current, next year's allowable millage increase. So 121.6 times 4.7% gives us 5.7 mils. So at this point in time, and it will change, it appears that we could go increase millage if the board chooses by 5.7 mils. Again, we're still missing that one component of population growth. And as soon as we receive that, we will update these numbers. But this is a lot different than what we've seen in the past. As you can see that column, we're generally in the 3 to 4.5 mil increase range. This year is a bit different. So just wanted to point that out. And then over to the state revenues, the two categories I mentioned earlier, EFA and the Tier 3 local property tax relief. So based on the State Department of Education's budget proposal to the legislature, there is a proposal to raise the base student cost, which is one component of the EFA calculation, from $2,516 per student, weighted student, to $2,546. Recall, this pot of money is about $18 million for the school district. It would equate to about $18 million in this formula, but we do receive only about 25%. Beaufort receives about 25% of that base student cost because of our index of tax-paying ability, the index of wealth in districts in the state. Beaufort having one of the highest, wealthiest in terms of assessed values of properties in a county, typically receives the lowest state funding, percentage of state funding in the state of South Carolina. But fortunately, our estimates show that this would increase our revenue in that category by $735,000. So that is positive. Sales tax reimbursement. This pot is about $49 million. So it is a significant, it's about half of the total state revenue we receive. We were informed by the state, I believe it's the Fiscal Affairs Office or Department of Revenue, one of those state officials indicated an increase of $1.7 million. So that is a favorable increase. And that is, again, due to Act 388. That's where they removed school operating taxes from legal residences and instead replaced it with the 1 cent of sales tax. Those are given, collected at the state level and then dispersed back to all the school districts. So this is that source of funds and how that flows.
Tina's hands up. Tina and William's hands up.
Okay, we have a question. Dr. Graz, go ahead.
So can you go back, Robin, to page 8? And Tanya, the banked millage rolled forward. Is there a time limit on how long you can go back to banked millage, and what is that?
Yes, good point. Thank you. I should have touched on that. There is a 3-year look back. So if you have banked millage, you can go back 3 years. However, last year we used all of our look back and all of our current year allowable increase. So therefore we have 0 in the bank. We have no millage left in the bank at this point.
Okay.
So we will.
Thank you. That was my question.
Begins again another 3 years.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
Well, my question was going to be in terms of the information that you and Dr. Rodriguez will get a copy of. Does that affect the budget in any way, shape, or form?
What we receive is a letter stating the CPI rate, and then we have to, and maybe a listing of every other school district's rate. And those are also posted on the Revenue and the Fiscal Affairs websites. So it's also available there. But we just take that information and apply it to these formulas and then provide that to the board.
Right. But my question was, but with us, in terms of us coming up with different things in terms of the year, I mean, the budget, when we have those meetings, it does that determine the budget in any way, shape, or form? Is more of my question.
Absolutely. The millage increase, allowable increase, is then multiplied by the value of a mill. So if a mill is $1.3 million, that gives us the total tax revenue budget that we're assuming for the new year. So that is directly related to the next year's budget. Yes, sir.
Thank you. That was my question. Thank you for the Ms. Crosby. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. State budget priorities. So one thing I want to do each time I come to the committee or to the board is to update you on any legislative issues. I've really taken an interest sort of to the legislature this year, and it's actually very interesting. There's an app called SC Legislature. If you haven't gotten on it, you can actually follow committees or follow members of the legislature. And I am following the House Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee in case any education related or education funding related bills come up. I can keep track of sort of some of the things that are going on, and you can watch the videos of the recordings of the session. So it's rather interesting. But there's two state budget priorities, two versions of that this year regarding education funding. The state superintendent always proposes a budget on behalf of the Department of Education, and that is a 2% salary increase for next year, a $30 increase in base student cost, which I referred to a few slides ago, and a 5% bus driver increase, and those are on the state minimum salary schedule. Now, there's a slew of other priorities, but these related particularly to areas of particular interest that would have a large effect on our budget. In contrast, the governor has proposed some priorities. One is to provide a $2,000 teacher salary increase. And if you recall, this past year, we had a $1,000 in the current budget year, we have a $1,000 increase in our salary schedule, which we implemented on the first paycheck of the school year. So I'm not sure which one will maintain in the budget or be passed, but we'll be actively looking out at both of those. A 2% teacher salary increase would be closer to a 4% increase, cost of living increase, as opposed to the 2% proposed by the state superintendent. So that'll be an interesting conversation. And so we'll keep in tune with what's going on there. But another major component, I went to a state meeting a few weeks ago and been reading up, and there is a proposal for a new education funding formula. So it's coming out of the Department of Administration, and they are rolling together multiple EFA and EIA funds and calculating more on a simplified calculation as opposed to the typical EFA calculation. And it bases it more on the cost of a teacher. So it compares the weighted student numbers and the value of the cost of an average teacher's salary and benefits, and funds it more with the goal of focusing on those areas instead of particular areas of interest that are specific to different educational categories, such as gifted and talented, or ESOL, or other elements of the formula, other funding sources like those are. So we are following this. We have the formula that they're using and doing our best to project what the effects of that might be on our revenue. So we're watching that closely to see if that has any legislative support this year. It appears that we would might benefit from the formula. They are changing the weighted pupil, the weightings, particularly some of the special education categories. And Beaufort does have, I think, a 12% population or so, so that we may, it appears that we would not be harmed by the formula at this time, but we're continuing to fine tune those calculations. So we'll keep the board informed of how those discussions, how they go. So the next steps are that we are going to be seeking input from the board and the community on budget priorities. We are working now with various staff members, senior staff potentially, to determine how is the best way to gather that input. We're monitoring the local revenues through the tax millage and the current year revenues and how those are coming in. Then we're projecting then we'll begin to project the current and future revenues, monitor legislative issues, and we're going to continue preparing the budget and the staffing and putting all those things together. So I put the budget schedule up here for the board, what's in your approved board calendar. With that, I will take any questions.
Question. Dr. Wisniewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tanya, I just wanted to make a suggestion. One of the things that I'm hearing from constituents and other members of the public that are coming up and they're asking about the ESSER funds and things like that. They want updates on it. How much money did we get? You know, are we rolling it into our fund balance? Are we able to roll it into our fund balance? And they're under certain kinds of impressions based on what kind of discussions they're having with, their friends and community members. So I guess the suggestion or the question that I have is, can we perhaps add, when we're seeking input from the community, or maybe presenting this in the future, that we add a component that talks about or touches on those ESSER and CARE dollars and how they have anything to do with our yearly budget, just so that people aren't under any misconception that, we've got a ton of money we're rolling into our fund balance or something like that.
I probably would need to have a conversation with you to understand, maybe get some ideas on how to, I guess, what questions to ask or what information. Perhaps it's just informational that we add to maybe a survey or something at that point. We did go out, provide surveys or mandated by the state to do ESSER funding surveys and gain public input from those, which we did a few months back. And you're right, the ESSER funds and the general fund are two totally different funding sources, which must be kept separate. ESSER funds are very restricted with only certain allowable categories. And then we do update the board, as you all know, once a month on the second board meeting of each month, provide a specific report. And it is also on our website for viewing of the categories of spending. But ESSER funds cannot go into the general fund balance, and vice versa, nor can the funds cross over and be spent in the other areas unless there are certain restricted, they fall within the restricted categories. But perhaps we could put some informational text in the survey to just provide some data, or, you know, if it were not allowed in the ESSER funds, is there something in particular that you would like to see or prioritize, you know, as a priority in the general fund budget? You know, so.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that and that survey that went out gathered the input. I think my main concern is making sure that the constituency is educated on the allowable uses for the ESSER funds and how they may or may not have impacted our budget just for future years in the case that there is going to be an ask for a millage increase or anything like that. If we begin having those discussions and people think or misunderstand those allowable uses, it can cause a lot of headaches, I think, in the public. And we don't want anybody to be misinformed of those allowable uses and how we are using the funds that are coming to us from either local, state, or federal. So I just think it's very important that we do provide some type of education on that. And
perhaps,
using it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Perhaps when we will be going to county council to their finance committee, probably in late March or early April, that is probably a perfect opportunity for us to give a brief update on the allowable activities, what our progress is, what revenues, what allocations we've received, what allocations, category allowable activities we have. And that might be a perfect opportunity to start with that discussion as we roll into the general fund budget discussion.
Thank you. I just think it's important. Thank you. I appreciate you entertaining me.
Yeah. Hands up.
Let's see.
Okay. Now we're going to move to a budget proposal that I asked to talk to the committee about. And if you go back, keep it on that slide, and go back to page 4. Okay, to give you some background, since I came on the board 2019, I looked at, you look at 2019, you see where we had the major drop in revenue due to the reassessment. That caused us to deal with that. Plus, you'll see that we also had a shortfall in previous reassessment years. You can see them on the chart, to a tune of total of $19 million. Right now, we had to take care of that. We had to cope with that by taking it out of our fund balance. And so now, since 2019, we have come back with our fund balance, and we are now at approximately $50 million in fund balance, which is about 20% of our annual budget, which is, according to GASB, the laws of, so to speak, of government finance, that's about where you should be. It shouldn't be much more than that. I've said in the past that I could make a case that we should have more so that we don't have to use a TAN to tide us over because of our way our funding comes in. But having briefed the county council now for 2 years on the budget process, it comes up every time. Well, you can lower the millage rate and reduce your fund balance. That is not what we can do, because if we reduce our fund balance, all we do is have to increase the TAN, and we have to use what monies we don't spend every year to rebuild our fund balance. So that's the discussion. Where do we get this money that has allowed us since 2019 to rebuild our fund balance? Now, obviously, COVID has had an impact. Part of the impact has been when we had to shut everything down, we didn't pay much for utilities and other things. We saved some money there, but this is very, very important. And this is what you also talk to your constituents about ESSER funds. 80% of our budget, 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. Salary and benefits. That's not salary and benefits for our contract employees. We pay, that's up to the contractor to take care of salary and benefits. We just pay a contract. We don't pay for his salaries and benefits. So for our, what, 4,400 employees?
2,700?
2,700. Okay, yes, 44, I think it's with our contract. Yeah. So our 2,700 employees, which when you stop and look at it, each employee costs a significant amount of money. And you know how we build our budget? We build our budget starting with spaces. We say, we need X number of employees in these particular areas. And each of those employees has a salary allotted to them. Now, the salaries have to be somewhat flexible in your budgeting because, for example, when we recruit a teacher, we don't know if that teacher has a master's degree or a PhD. And so there is no generic starting salary, and we don't know how long they've been teaching, what step they're at. So that's a variable. It's a little easier with the other employees. They come in to a position that's slated for this salary. And that's how the budget is built. Okay. Every month we see the personnel ratification report. And you can see that at the first of the year, we're hiring lots of folks. And we've had fewer folks that have, retired or gone on to other things. But then through the year, we have more people that drop out or resign or terminated and fewer people hired. So when you look at it, where we have made up our savings to increase our fund balance is from non-spent salaries and benefits. That's where that money has come from. Okay? And that's going to happen every year. Now, what's the impact of that? Well, the impact, if you look at it from a macro view, you can say, well, you've budgeted too much. No, we didn't. We just had the normal ebbs and flows of employees that every company institution has. However, we're now at where we should be with our fund balance. That means that at the end of this fiscal year, we should not have any money left over, or if we have just a little bit, so we can pay for unforeseen things that were purchased in this fiscal year, but you have to pay for some of it in the next fiscal year. You have that. So you have to have a little bit of that. So we are at a different mode of how we execute this year's budget. We need to go, when you go to county council, we say, we spent it all, baby, and this is what we need for next year. So how do we do that? Well, this is what my proposal is. And to show that, I'm going to do a little graphic design work, and hopefully it works.
You want to do it up here?
Yeah, let's try that.
I'm sharing.
We made it work prior.
I have to share you now.
Okay. Here we go. All right, let's see if we Push on here.
Mhm.
You should see on your screen a yellow circle.
Robin, you didn't screen share it yet.
Okay. Oop.
Wait.
All right, try it.
Try it now. So I have to start it over again?
Yep.
All right. You see the circle?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is our operating budget. Our general fund, so to speak, okay? 80% is salaries and benefits. 20% is the other things. It's their contracts, it's our utilities, it's our supplies, it's our maintenance. So 80% of our general fund is salaries and benefits. We don't spend all that money. So what should we do with that? What we should do with that, first of all, let's talk about the impact of not spending all our salaries and benefits. That means we don't have all the positions that we budgeted for. So that means that somebody is doing extra work. That means that our teachers have bigger class sizes. That means that we have mechanics that are working overtime, that do more. That we have administrators that are working longer hours to take up the slack. So my proposal is that we take this salaries and benefits and we break it out into pots of money by employees. And we say, okay, at the end of the year, in June, we know we have X number of dollars. Let's just say $8 million. So we have $8 million. And we know of that $8 million, we have teachers that we were short, that we budgeted for teachers. And let's say in teachers, we have $2 million. And in the pot of money for certified staff, we have $500,000. And let's say for all others, and there's many more circles I could drive. I could have for bus drivers, I could have hourly employees, and so on. But each one of those gets a pot of money. What I'm proposing is that in June, we take this $2 million, this right here, and we give it to our teachers as an end of year bonus. So that compensates them for having a bigger class size. You have a bigger class size, you got more tests to grade, you got more papers to review. It's more difficult. So you deserve that. Same if you have money in the other pots of money, you give them to those employees. Now, nice thing about the teacher, in our operation fund, we have a slice of money for substitute teachers. Well, in June, we're not going to need any more substitute teachers. So you take that money, what you have left over, and you add it to the teachers. A little incentive not to use substitutes. The bottom line is at the end, and oh, by the way, there's still some money in here as well, in the operating funds, in the maintenance and so on. What do we do with that? And that should go to operations committee, to Robert Otting, and say, okay, what were you wanted to do, but you weren't budgeted to do this year? Let's spend it. So the bottom line is at the end of the fiscal year, you've spent all the money because we don't want to add to our fund balance. So that's the way we handle things in the federal government. We spend it all. So spend it all is what I'm saying that we should do this year. Now, next year, I think we should have the same kind of mindset, spend it all, but also look at salaries. One of the problems we have is for the last 5 years, let's go to full screen, or do a regular screen.
Get out of this.
Yeah. So at the end of next year, for 5 years, we've given our employees a $5,000 locality pay. That's nice. The employees like to get half of it just before Christmas and half of it at the end of the year. But there's two problems with it. One problem is when we compare our teacher's salary across the state, we don't include that. And so that's why we get the teachers group that come in and say, well, you're at the bottom third in salaries in the state. Well, not really, because we had $5,000, but that's not reported as our teacher's salary. It's also an issue when you go out and recruit teachers and you say, okay, we're going to start you out at $35,000 a year, but we're going to give you a $5,000 cost of living. If I'm somebody that's being recruited, wait a minute, you give me an extra $5,000 cost of living? That must mean stuff that's expensive to live there. The other issue, the negative part of that, is we don't pay any benefits on that $5,000. So we don't pay any FICA, we don't pay any unemployment, we don't pay anything. We give them $5,000, and then they have to report that to the IRS, and I guess we put it in our W-2.
We do pay FICA.
We do pay FICA. Put it in their W-2.
But we do pay.
But it also does not count toward retirement.
Oh.
So what I'm saying is, so we've already been budgeting this every year, so it's now a recurring cost. Is I would propose that we say, okay, there's $5,000 added to everybody's base pay, and it's going to cost us a little more money, about what, $2 million? About $2 million more, because we have to pay benefits on that. But it brings up what our pay is, our base pay for employees. It counts toward retirement. And if you use this end of year money being returned to employees by it, you're saying, listen, we'll still give you, if you don't spend everything in your pot of money, you're going to get that at the end of the year. And we continue to spend everything that we budget. And now the question is now, how do we make sure that we don't have another major drop in revenue at reassessment? And that's why, one of the reasons why fiscal autonomy is what we need, because as I've looked back on all the records, for every year during reassessment year, what the district asked for would have generated the money that was budgeted. But what the district asked for was not what the district got in millage. So that's why fiscal autonomy is important, because if we would have gotten what we asked for, we wouldn't have had a $19 million deficit. So that's the proposal that I would like you all to think about or ask any. First of all, if you have any questions, I'll answer any questions. So I see David's hand. David?
Thank you, Dick. I think the end result you're going for is really good, but I can assure you that in my district, saying spend it all, because that's the government model, is a death blow to it. So somehow we have to sell this without saying that. It's just too much feeling in it, and I think it's in most of the county that we don't want to follow the federal model, because spending it all is a bad thing. I think we need to sell this by saying we have to reward the teachers, and we're looking around at ways to do it. So that's just a comment on our sales pitch.
Understand.
Rachel's.
Dr. Wisniewski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment and concerns are predominantly in the model being pensionable. I think long-term, what we're looking at and the issue that we're facing is we have a decreased amount of discretionary spending because there is an increased amount of rising benefit costs and pension costs. So I'm concerned that if we're going to put into play a model that's going to be pensionable, that we're just exacerbating the issue long-term for the district. I think that if we're going to do a model like this, I would advocate for it to be non-pensionable. And I also would advocate that our legislative committee in our district or school board look at some type of policy recommendations at the state level that deal with the overarching problem of the rising benefit costs and pension costs. I know that that's a sticky road, and a lot of people have opinions on it, but I mean, most of our teachers or the people that are new teachers, they'd rather have more money in their pocket at the moment. I mean, that's what most of the surveys that I've read say, that they would prefer to have more cash in the bank and cash in their pocket than they are concerned about their pension benefits. So I just think that's something we need to think about when we talk about this plan.
Yeah. The problem is we're only going to get 25% of what the state offers. And when they say they're going to give each teacher $2,000, we're not going to get $2,000 for every teacher.
It to be 1,000 or less, or a fraction.
I mean, and the other part of the problem is we have a serious issue, as Maria Walls tells us, about the change from 6% to 4%. What's going on, according to Maria, is people that are second homeowners see a hot housing market, are putting their houses on the market. The buyer is buying it not as a rental property, but as legal residence. And so the good news is they're buying it at a higher price. So that makes a higher assessed value of that property. The bad news is they go from 6% to 4%. And that's going to cause some issues. And so I think the value of the mill is going to go up, but the percentage of people that are legal residents is also going to go up. And the fundamentals of Act 388 are not in our favor. In fact, they're against us. And so we have to have some way in the long term to adjust our revenues and make the case for teachers. And the case for teachers is, you 6%ers, you know, I know it's tough, but we're not going to change the law. 388 will stay. We can do all the lobbying we can, but we are one of 44 counties, and we're going to be outvoted every time because they like the way it is. Most of the counties like the way it is. So we're going to have to look at a different way. Now, I talked to Tanya earlier, and she said that this model of how the budget is taken care of was done in the past. Would you mention that?
You should want to tell me.
Yeah.
Several years ago, there was a teacher incentive model. It was developed by the state called CAP. And it was an incentive based on performance or growth in a school. So particularly there was a finite set of dollars and it was funded, partially funded by the state with a gradual decline of percentage of funding where we took over a larger percentage each year for a period of 5 years, with the final year being 100% funded by the district. Once it got to that point, unfortunately it sunsetted, but it was a performance-based model that provided bonuses to staff of our schools, not just teachers, but all staff. So there was a similar there was a model in place at that time, and it still exists. And we could, explore that to see some options for the new year, what that might look like.
So this is just food for thought. And I agree with David's view that we can't say we're going to spend every dime, even though that's exactly what we should be doing. The big thing to me is that we cannot continue to build our fund balance. And to take the risk of saying, well, we'll cut our budget up front to anticipate that we'll come in on target. That is not a good strategy, and especially in times of uncertainty. You budget based on a conservative view of revenue and a conservative view of expenditures. And that allows you the flexibility to deal with the unforeseen. That's in basis what our issue is how are we going to execute the budget that we develop based on assumptions of full employment, assumptions of the impact of inflation, assumptions on the amount of revenue we will get in a tax system that allows people to change their tax status and, oh, by the way, and add whether or not they're going to be homestead. And I wish we got every dime that was that the Homestead Act takes away, but we don't. So the state's not going to bail us out. And I think we have to realize that. And so who does it fall on? Well, it falls on the taxpayer. And so how do we tell the taxpayer that we are stewards of their funds and that we're not going to overtax them? So that's the challenge. Any other comments?
I think David is saying something, but I can't hear him.
Who is it?
David,
David?
are you?
David's on mute. David's not. Okay, so that was it. The future topics. We have future topics. Mr. Campbell does not. Dr. Claus, do you have any future topics?
Not at this time, thank you.
And Dr. Wisniewski, do you have any future topics?
Not at this time.
Okay, I don't. Tanya has a future topic.
I have a list.
Okay.
Minority Women Business Enterprise and Sole Source Report. I have these in a list in an email ready to hit send to you, Robin. Grant authorization. We do an annual grant authorization resolution. And I'll have another budget update next time.
Question, do we need to take action on the second quarter financial report?
No, that will
Okay.
be in the annual
Gotcha.
OE monitoring. So
Yes.
that will no longer be periodic approval. It will go with the
With the
annual,
whole thing at the end?
annual report. Yes, gotcha. Yes, ma'am.
But I believe that we will have on the agenda and under the committee reports that the quarterly financial report was reviewed by the committee. And are you going to provide a executive summary?
The first page and a half is the executive summary.
Right.
So
And as well as, will you give the entire, I would suggest that the entire budget update be given to the full board. Is there any objection by the committee members that the budget update be given to the full board?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Very good.
Do we have to change anything about the meeting next month?
Yes, the meeting next month. I'm going to be gone from the 4th of March until the 22nd of March. So I don't know if there's any other people that are going to be gone. Could we have the meeting at say the 24th of March?
The 24th of March is the ad hoc Bluffton group at 5 o'clock.
At 5 o'clock?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Unless you want to do it the last week of March, March 31st.
March 31st, would March 31st work for committee members?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, let's do that then, March 31st.
5 o'clock?
5 o'clock? Great. All right, is there any other business? Hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Seconded, all in favor? Aye.
aye.
Thank you very much.